southwest corner of the county, who started this a couple years ago. Sonny Brown back there at the registration table and I were the first two. We called it Tipple and Talk then. We don't call it that anymore, but we still like to tipple a bit. Bob Seaman walking up the hall here is one of the group. Al Kraus walking up the hall behind him is one of the group. Donna Starr's husband is one of the group, and she's here representing herself and her husband because he's an accountant and you know what day tomorrow is. We have done a variety of things, and later on in the program I'm going to talk a little bit about activism at the grassroots level, and one of the things I'm going to ask you to become active in is identifying subjects that you would like to see presented at a meeting like this. But I don't want to waste any time in introducing Carl Weimer, the current chair of our county council. He's a 3-term member of the council, and prior to being on the council, he was the director of resources, the executive director of resources for sustainable communities. Besides his work on the council, he's the executive director of the National Pipeline Safety Trust and a member of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Technical Hazardous Liquid Pipeline Safety Standards Committee.
See it again fast.
Yeah. And a member of the governor-appointed Washington State Citizens Committee on Pipeline Safety. You kind of see a little recurring theme here about where Carl's passions and interests lie. And I think we are very fortunate to have him this evening to talk about Whatcom County at the Crossroads. Carl.
Good evening. So thanks for having me out. I don't have any intention of speaking for an hour. This isn't going to be a lecture, so I hope that you have lots of things you want to ask me about, because that would help fill the time. Just to give you a little bit of what's going on, there's lots of things going on with the county council. As some of you may know, the council kind of changed makeup the first of the year. There was an election last November, and the council tends to have this pendulum thing where it swings from conservative to progressive to conservative, and right now we're kind of into the more of the progressive swing. Depending on the issue, you never can count on us for everything. So that's kind of where we're at. So things are changing, and there's a huge number of issues coming at the county right now. And that's kind of, as Ruth pointed out, we're at the crossroads of a whole bunch of things. I know I was out here for a candidate forum last fall, and everybody wanted to talk about the coal port up here. Because we sit right at the crossroads of a whole bunch of the energy issues. You know, everybody saw the coal coming and has been talking about that. The thing that people didn't see coming was oil trains, which now we're right in the middle of. BP's already got theirs moving, and Phillips 66 has finished the permitting and building there, so we're going to start seeing the big oil trains coming. I don't know how many of those we'll see. We're also right at the crossroads, as Ruth said. I'm very involved with pipelines. We have a whole bunch of new pipelines that aren't going to actually get to here, I don't think, but they're coming into BC, and it will affect our waters out here because there's a huge new pipeline. Everybody's heard about the Keystone. Well, the one they're running into Vancouver will be almost as big as Keystone, and they're going to use it to fill tankers, which will then come through our water. So, you know, there's lots of people concerned about what happens if one of those tankers gets in an accident or has a spill. There are lots of pipelines proposed up north in BC where the tanker traffic will be coming through here too. And I'm not even sure we know exactly what's going on altogether at Cherry Point. I know with my pipeline safety hat on, I've talked to executives in Houston who have visited Cherry Point and have been talking about that as a potential oil export facility too, if maybe the coal doesn't go through. And I know big gas companies from Houston have visited as an idea for exporting liquefied natural gas, which they're trying to do both in BC and in Oregon, and we've been kind of left alone. They've been scoping that out within the last year. So you know, we're certainly in the crossroads of all those things, and the county will be ultimately in charge of permitting anything that goes on at Cherry Point and/or helping steer, you know, those types of things. We kind of missed the oil train thing. It snuck in under the radar to a grand degree, and there probably wasn't a whole lot we could have done with it anyway, because it's mainly a federal issue. As far as control, you know, local governments can't tell the railroads what they can move. The feds have to do that. The feds control the safety of those cars, and we've already weighed in on that a little bit. So that's kind of the energy crossroads we're at. We're also at the crossroads of a whole lot of water issues around here. For years, water issues have been building up, and there's a slew of them. If you live in Bellingham, you talk about protecting Lake Whatcom. It's a drinking water source for 90,000 people, and the water's been in decline. But that's certainly not the only water issue we have. You've probably been seeing in the paper more and more concern about people's water rights. It's just dawned on some people that we don't really have enough water in the county, even though it seems like it rains here enough. During the dry months, you know, August, September, October, the creeks get really low and there's not enough water in them to support salmon at the levels that need to be supported. The tribes here just recently went to the federal government and said, bring in your lawyers and help us prove how much of the water in that creek belongs to us. And all the estimates are showing that once that all works through the courts, and it probably will take a while, there might not be enough water left for all the people that are already using the water, let alone the people that want to move out in the county and drill a well.
We are very sorry.
So there's lots of those issues going on with who can get legal water. Then there's a whole bunch of just water quality issues. Birch Bay has been closed on and off because of pollution into the bay, some fecal coliform pollution coming down Terrell Creek. Both Drayton Harbor and the Nooksack River are affected by that. We have a huge part of the north part of the county that all the water coming out of the groundwater is polluted with nitrates to the point it's not safe. So we have a whole bunch of water issues coming at us that we already have a list of 300 projects that various advisory committees have given us that adds up to over $200 million worth of stuff. And we haven't been chipping away at that list very quickly, and none of the water problems are getting fixed. So there's a big issue about pushing water stuff to the fore too. Then the last crossroads that we're kind of at is criminal justice. We finally have purchased a site for a new jail, but we sit in a very weird area being this close to the border when it comes to criminal justice, because we tend to get a little more of it because of people that are either trying to get across the border or get caught at the border and end up into our criminal justice system. So, you know, I've talked about $200 million for water programs. There's going to be another $100 million more or less for a new jail. And lots of talk about what that jail, you know, that's just building the jail and the facility. How do we build enough programs that go along with that, that we don't just fill it up and have to add on to it right away, because it's really easy to put people in jail, although it's more cost effective to design programs that keep them out of jail in the first place. So that'll be another big discussion in the next year or so, now that we've kind of figured out where it's going to go. So that's kind of my opening at the crossroads, and I'd love just to talk about whatever you want to talk about, or whatever you want to complain that the county's not doing enough of or too much of or something.
You've mentioned $100 million for a new jail.
That was the original estimate. That's a real 30,000-foot level estimate. But
that seems amazing.
yeah, I mean, and that includes purchasing the property and building the jail. It won't only be a jail, it'll be the new sheriff's office too, but that's a pretty minor part of it. Jails are way more expensive than schools, just because you have to build them so people can't get out.
You in the council have been in this hear no evil, see no evil space regarding the coal terminal.
Oh, you can't say coal, sorry.
That's what I mean. Can you describe more specifically what the role of the county council is in this whole issue? Because apparently it's a very significant role, and that's why hush hush, hear no evil. Could you describe that a bit?
Yeah, we're in a real weird place, because a lot of people want to talk about the coal, but legally we're not supposed to talk about coal.
Right.
Now, I can tell you what I know about the county's role in coal and what I think. What I'm not supposed to hear from you is specific things that you think about the coal terminal.
Right.
And why that is ultimately the council will be the decision maker on whether they get their shoreline permit to build that facility. So in that permit approval role, we're called what they call quasi-judicial, and it's like we're actually serving as a judge. And if we appear to have made up our minds before we get the evidence, then whichever side doesn't like how we've made up our minds can challenge us, and we won't be allowed to vote. So if I stand here tonight and say, that coal port's the stupidest damn thing I've ever heard of, or I love it, it's gonna create all these jobs, you know, I could lose my right to vote when it actually comes to the council. So it's a real weird thing. Now what the council can do, anything that's public information that's available to everybody, we can read that. So there's already tons of stuff on the county website about, you know, the scope of how they're gonna do the environmental impact statement. There's a lot of stuff on Ecology's website about the whole thing. We can read all that and talk about that. What we can't, you know, I can't hear from you folks tonight what you think about coal because the other 6 people on the council wouldn't be hearing the same thing. Although potentially, if this is getting taped, we could take that tape and put it in the record and that'd still be good.
Sir, I have a question regarding 2 topics. The Cherry Point, whatever they're doing there, and the use of water. And you brought up a very valid point about speaking about water earlier.
Right.
And that, whatever that project is, I think they require a lot of water. Can you comment on that, specific to our water needs as a county and potentially what this project would require?
Right. Yeah, I think the proposal for the coal port there, I get my numbers wrong, and somebody here probably knows more than I do, because like I said, we're not supposed to be paying much attention to this yet. But it's something like 5 million gallons a day that it would use, a lot of it just to spray to keep the coal dust down. That would come from the public utility district, which is it's a utility district that serves water, and their main customers are the Cherry Point Industrial Facility. So they give water to Intalco and BP and those, and they have water rights sufficient to provide that much water. Now, I think the head scratcher for a lot of people in the community is if we don't have enough water for strawberries and raspberry farms that are already here, why would we be given 5 million gallons for something new? So I think that will be part of the discussion at some point. It already is part of the discussion. I mean, there's a number of people that have more water than they need, the PUD being one of them right now. City of Bellingham being another one. They have more water, they have a water right that's larger than what they need. And they've been having discussions with like the city of Linden, who doesn't have enough water right now. Is there a way that they can transfer some of Bellingham's water rights to the city of Linden or to some of the agriculture users in the north part of the county to make them legally whole on paper? Because the ag people are the ones that are really going to be hurting if this goes the way it appears to through the courts. Because a lot of them are using water they don't have a legal paper water right for.
Quick question, the agency that's managing the water to the refineries and these other, is that a private sector agency?
No, it's a public utility district.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, who gave them the authority to sell part of this to Goldman Sachs? And who gave them the authority to make these decisions without the rest of the public knowing about it?
You know, I don't know exactly how the public utility district is organized. I know they have a water right, and they were organized to do more than just serve the industrial people at Cherry Point. You know, they looked at putting in fiber optics for the whole county not too long ago as a public utility district. So they have a broader charter than just, you know, the industrial users, but I don't know why they focus so much narrowly on that.
The 100 million for corrections, is the federal government gonna kick in anything, given the border issue, and what about operating budget after it's up and running? Is that something separate, I assume?
We won't, yeah, that's something separate. And the problem is you build a bigger jail and then the operating budget gets bigger too, because all of a sudden you need more jailers and more that type of stuff. Although the way this jail is planned to be laid out, there's kind of a a benefit too, because it'll be on one floor, so one jailer can see a whole lot of more what's going on than the way it is now where it's stacked.
How many guests will it accommodate?
Oh, no, that number isn't really clear. At one point, they were talking about 1,000-bed jail, and now it's back down to more 400 or 500, 400 to 600. And the final number will kind of come out as we get a little closer to the actual planning of the, we've been focused on finding a site, which has been, get going fast, and then something falls apart. But
Cherry Point.
now we've got, I've always wanted to put it in Point Roberts. You just put them in Point Roberts, and say you're good to go. If they escape, they go to Canada. Who cares? Don't tell Point Roberts I said that.
I have two questions on water and two on jails. The water that is being sprayed on the coal will obviously be filthy. Does that then just go right into the bay?
You know, like I said, I'm not supposed to be paying too much attention to it. I think they have a recycling system planned, so they won't use the water one time, it'll be used multiple times, and it can't just go into the bay that way.
Okay.
It would have to be cleaned before it's discharged.
And then is there any way of capturing all this excess rainwater and storing it and using it rather than just let it be washed down
Yeah.
into the bay, or is that illegal to do?
Well, it depends how you do it. I mean, it's already being done in some places, like the Conservation District has been working with a variety of different landowners, mainly agriculture people, to restore wetlands. Because one of the problems why we don't have enough water in some of our creeks that where we used to is we've cleared so many wetlands. And the wetlands is what used to hold the water like a sponge and then kind of meter it out slowly over the dry seasons. A lot of those wetlands have been destroyed, so the Conservation District's been working with farmers to restore wetlands and parts of the property that's not as valuable for ag. So as we build those wetlands back up, it will hopefully store some water. There's another program where you can build ponds on your property that can, you know, meter out some of the water. What you can't legally do at this point is like pave a big area and then collect all the water that comes off of that pavement for
That's
use.
illegal.
That's illegal.
And then,
You can put like rain barrels on your house.
you are allowed to do
That's
that.
legal, but at a certain level, if you create too much impervious surface just to collect rainwater, the Department of Ecology says you're over the limit.
Are the folks who will be monitoring this filtration system the same friendly, ecologically friendly folks who run the coal facility?
For the most part, yes. I mean,
Oh, that's
hopefully
comforting.
there'll be some oversight from agencies also, but most of the regulations in this country mainly fall on the people that are being regulated. Heats.
The broader water issue, can you describe, one thing, area that's really kind of murky to me is this business between the planning unit and the joint board. It's really confusing to me what this is all about, and can you clarify it somewhat to us?
Sure. Maybe. In the late 90s, the state legislature passed Watershed Planning Act, which required local governments to try to do better watershed planning. And through that, they asked us to form what they called planning units for watershed planning that were made up of all the different stakeholder groups that really had a stake in water. So like, you know, the development community, environmentalists, fishers.
Ag.
Yeah, ag. There's a whole bunch, I think there's 18 different groups that are part of the planning unit. And it's a real kind of citizens-based group. The agencies are involved too, Ecology, the City of Bellingham, the PUD, small cities.
But the tribes
You
did
know,
not join that.
in the
Okay.
original thing that the legislature passed, they said the tribes could be part of the planning unit. The tribes here in Whatcom County chose not to be part of that because they tend to only want to negotiate government to government.
Right.
So they don't want to sit at a table and negotiate away their water rights with farmers and environmentalists.
Right.
So that's where we organized the initiating governments and the joint board, which are kind of one and the same, as a way to involve the tribes. So we have this joint board, which is made up of both tribes, Whatcom County, the City of Bellingham, and the PUD, the major water folks in the county that kind of sit as a oversight group over the whole thing. And what we did back in, before my time on the council, I think it was about 98, 2000, we gave that joint board $7 million. We took out of our flood fund, put it into the watershed planning fund, and the joint board oversees that money, and they kind of dole it out for projects. The hassle comes because sometimes the joint board and the planning unit don't agree on what projects ought to be funded. And the planning unit kind of disappeared 3 or 4 years ago, just because they had went through the planning effort, they'd come up with a countywide plan, it got approved. The joint board to some degree thought their job's done now we're gonna implement the plan. And now we're at this place where we're trying to start the planning unit up again to deal with a number of these water issues, such as especially the who's got water rights and who doesn't. Clear as mud?
Yeah, so the joint board is less representative of all the stakeholders, from what I hear you say.
Right, it's all government groups,
Ah.
tribal and, municipalities. It doesn't have any of the kind of citizen groups in it.
Birch Bay Water and Sewer is on the planning unit, right? Because they're in district.
Right,
And-
Roger Brown does a
Yes, and Roger.
good job of keeping people on their toes.
That's right, and Birch Bay needs to know the fact that there was a group of citizens called in to a water cat advisory last fall with Birch Bay Water and Sewer over this particular issue, because they felt like our water district is large and that we were not getting representation because of the big boys at the table up top.
Right.
And so now the planning unit is getting started again, because water for Birch Bay and all this area is really important too.
Yeah, and the planning unit's been kind of going since, I think, late last summer again. And it's a little unclear whether they're gonna keep going or not. Because I was on the planning unit, I was the environmental rep for the first 6 years that was going on, so I know how it works real well, and they have a decision-making mode that's really based on consensus. So if you ask them who ought to have water rights, they're never gonna be able to make that decision because they'll never get a consensus vote. So it was real good for big planning issues, but for making specific issues, there's so many kind of vested interests and conflicts of interest on that. It's real hard for them to come to a unanimous decision to make decisions to move things forward. They've been meeting since August. I think they got, I can't remember how much money. They're the only advisory committee we have in the county that actually, we hire a facilitator to run. That's how well they get along with each other.
Well, it's really broad, isn't it? I mean, it's the
It's very broad.
it's the wells and the.
Right. I mean, you want all the
ag.
interests that don't
Yeah.
agree and try to come to a good way to move things
Well,
forward.
and one of the meetings I was at, they were talking about whether they should just throw out this consensus thing, because that was just making them not.
And I think
be able
they
to go
actually
anyway.
changed that rule at their last meeting and went more to a majority type decision-making for things where they're just giving advice to the council.
Yes.
There's certain things, like if they adopt a whole new plan, or if they set in-stream flows, it'll be really important. They still have to basically all agree. There's kind of some wiggle room there too. But they changed a little bit in response to the council saying, why do we keep giving you money for facilitation when you've had 6 or 7 meetings and you have yet to accomplish one single thing?
I went to some of those meetings, and they're not fun.
Who do you, as a council member, where do you put your faith about the advice on the broad water issues? Is it the board or others or staff or?
Well, it depends on the water issue. I
Sure.
mean, there's so many different ones. Like, we have a lot of water quality issues, like in Birch Bay, Drayton Harbor. I would put my faith on that more in the shellfish protection districts, who really dig into the idea of bacterial pollution of those bays. I think they have good oversight on that. Water rights issue, that's a tougher one, and I listen, the ag folks have come a long way, and I think they get it. I went to a meeting that the farmers up around Linden organized, and they clearly understand what's coming at them and what they need to do. So I think you have to take input from both. The joint board has a lot of the technical expertise. A lot of scientists work for that group, and I certainly try to pay attention to the science. But you need to pay attention to the politics too. So the people that are on private wells out in the county that are all gonna show up in droves and yell and scream at county council meetings, you gotta take some kind of stock in what they think too. And they've been the most vocal ones at this point. In the back there.
I keep getting 2 more questions at a time. Number one, as a private well owner, the ones that are already there, are they grandfathered? And we're just talking about new ones? I didn't like that.
Well, it depends would be the accurate answer.
Okay,
I mean, the way Western water law works, the first person that used the water for a benefit is the first in line. So it all depends when your well got drilled and you started using the water, where you are in line. So, you know, the salmon were here first, in-stream flows protect the salmon, in-stream flows have the first water right. The tribes were here next.
before that.
They have some water rights guaranteed to them for living on the reservation. That's yet to be defined. And then it all depends who came in after that. The city of Bellingham, the PUD has pretty early water rights. There's some other big, like Puget Sound Energy has a big water right in the county that they got pretty early, like 1930. So I don't know what the date of your well came in, but if you got yours in 1970, anybody that drilled before you is in line before you, and once the amount of water in the streams gets defined, if there's not enough left, you could get cut off.
I don't know why I thought this was all for new real estate. They're talking about selling land and then that would go for new.
Yeah, and there was a lot of that missed stuff. People were saying, quick, run out and drill a well, then you're safe. And, well, that's not the way Western water law works. It would be very hard, and there's been hardly any places where, you know, they'll go to somebody in an existing resident, turn their water off. I mean, there's probably ways to work around that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And the other one I wanted to know was this amount of money for the new jail, would that include mental health beds and some counseling? That's a big problem.
Yes and no. I mean, and that's why it's very important to have these alternative programs to keep, I mean, too much of our jail is filled up with people with mental health issues. They just need the help so they don't end up in jail, because it's a very expensive way to treat mental health stuff. So there will be some increase in mental health type operations at the new jail. And our sheriff's office has actually done a really good job. A lot of the jail officers have gone through mental health training, so there's like a little triage group within the sheriff's office already. So there's a lot of work on that, but separate programs like mental health courts, and there's a triage center where people with mental health issues may go before they end up in jail. Those are all separate on top of the 100 million, plus or minus 10 million.
Hi, with regard to the water rights issue where there's certain people in line for rights starting at the top, going to the bottom, sounds like SSA Marine is probably one of the last ones who's asked for water rights. And it sounds like that to me, and there might have been others after them, but are they guaranteed 5 million gallons no matter what, even though other people are way ahead of them in terms of the right to get water out of the river?
Their water right wouldn't be their water right. It's not like they're gonna drill a well there at Cherry Point for their water. They're getting their water from the PUD, who has a bigger, older water right than they sell off to the industrial folks. So it's the PUD water right that wherever they're in line is where the water would be.
Oh, I see, okay. And then one other thing that relates to this, is the county council the ultimate body that will make decisions on the permitting, or do you work with the Department of Ecology and the Army Corps of Engineers first, and then, I mean, is there an ultimate decider, or are there 3 separate deciders?
There's 3 separate, really. I mean, we'll be overseeing a substantial development shoreline permit. That's the one we'll vote on. The Army Corps of Engineers has to approve wetland, upland type stuff, and then the Department of Natural Resources actually has to approve a lease for the pier itself on the tidelands. So there's really 3 different groups, and the Department of Ecology is wrapped up in all of that too, because they're partnering with the county on the whole EIS process. I'm trying to think if they actually have a decision-making role or not, but they'll have a lot to say.
Okay.
Carl, I have a question in regards to the oil trains that sound like they're coming. And I
Uh-huh.
understand that there's nothing that can be done, if that's commerce, that's federal law, they're gonna come. But I was wondering, has the county talked at all about what kind of emergency preparedness and getting ready for that in case there should be an accident? Because if I understand right, I think that getting rid of the DOT 111 tanker cars that easily spill and can cause fires, you know. It's been voluntary, I believe, amongst the railroads to get rid of those and to go to stronger cars, but I don't know, I don't have a lot of confidence that we won't see some DOT 111s out here, and so since we have slides and it'd be possible to have a derailment, can you tell me what the county's doing in that regard?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. I mean, our fire marshal's been meeting with all the different emergency responders in the county, asking them, what would you do? And all of them say, stand back and watch it burn, because they don't have the resources to deal with that type of a fire. Now, the one lucky thing in our favor around here, unlike places like King County, if it happened on the rail down there, is that we do have 2 refineries here that are well equipped to deal with those types of fire. So the only way you can put those fires out is to use a type of foam that you can actually put on it. The county and none of the small fire districts, have anywhere near enough foam, but the refineries do. So there's a mutual aid agreement. I think it's already in place, but it might be getting strengthened with the refineries, that if something happens nearby, that their emergency response people will respond to, and that make sure they stockpile enough of that foam that can help put out a fire. Now, it's not quite that clear, because they have to maintain enough at the refinery too, so if something goes on at the refinery the same time something's going on with rail somewhere else, there's still enough for them to deal with the refinery.
Now,
But that's just the one thing. The other thing is the county's already weighed in a little bit on, with the federal government, trying to push them. There's been a couple of meetings up here with Rick Larson and the congressional folks. I'm actually gonna be DC tomorrow. I'm supposed to be DC by 6 o'clock tomorrow, because I'm having dinner with the administrator of PHMSA, who is the agency that sets the safety standards for those .111 cars. So we've been talking with them, and it's a very strange situation, because the railroad industry themselves has been asking the federal government to make those cars, require stronger regulations on those cars for years, and the federal government hasn't been able to pass the law to do that, even though the railroad industry is even asking for it, which
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me much, because I deal with the same group with pipelines, and that's the way it usually works.
I have a follow-up question, if I may. Another concern I have, besides the derailment and the immediate, possibility of a horrible event like that, is that it gets very dry here in the summer and into the fall before the rains start. And because the Chucknut and a lot of our areas is so heavily forested, I could conceive of large forest fires also resulting. And has that also been looked into, if it were to trigger such an event, if we would be able to get the help that we need?
I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay.
I'm sure someone has considered that, but that's, again, probably way beyond the county's capabilities. But we do have mutual aid stuff, even with like DNR for forest fighting activities, but, yeah. It could go bad, it could get, think of worst case scenario and your brain will explode.
Have they done an analysis of how much of the money that's generated from these places is going to stay here in the form of jobs and tax revenue, et cetera? Or is it going to be like the cruise ships up in Juneau and Ketchikan, where it all goes?
Yeah, that's part of, the EIS that they're working on right now for at least the new Cherry Point terminal. That's one of the things they're looking at, the whole economics, because, if you read what you get in the mail, it's anywhere from 50 jobs to 5,000 jobs, and so the EIS hopefully will clarify that, and then the public will get to comment on how accurate that clarification was.
I have 2 questions on prisons. Is this going to be part of the prison system that is private? States all over the country are building private prisons, and many of them are making contracts to guarantee they fill them to a certain percentage. And those prison companies are making a lot of money on our tax dollars. And I'm wondering if this new prison is going to be part of that same system.
No, it won't. It'll be a county-owned and operated prison, and it's
Good.
my understanding that those private prisons are actually illegal in the state of Washington.
Good. And then the second question is, I know after Colorado legalized hemp and marijuana, the prison population went down, because they're no longer putting people in prison for possession or for growing the 2 kind of plants.
Right.
And is the same thing going to happen here? I don't understand the status yet of whether people having possession, for example, of marijuana will put them in prison, or is our law the same as Colorado's that allow them to have possession and to grow both plants?
Well, our law, starting the first of the year, is the same as Colorado's. We've legalized recreational marijuana, so no one's getting busted for
For smoking.
For
So-
smoking.
So they won't be filling the prisons with those in here.
Right, and the reality is, at least here, our local county jail really wasn't filling people with that anyway. Our jail was so full of people with real crimes that we were not
We're not
using
taking that.
space for people that got caught with a joint or something.
And will
Now,
that-
there are people that got caught at the border and held, and they were found to have marijuana, so it was kind of a contributing thing, and they may end up in the jail for a short period of time. But very small percentage of the population were there for just marijuana offenses.
What about the people that are growing the hemp or the marijuana without permits? Will they get put in jail?
Probably. You know, we don't have many of those in our jail locally. It hasn't been a big problem. But, and the whole reason that it got legalized was to try to take care of that problem. Now, no one knows how well that's gonna work because the legal pot might still be more expensive than the black market pot, and you still have people growing it, but we'll find out as time goes by, I guess. The back?
So in regards to these jails and the population that's going on, I know that the tribes actually have a treaty with the federal government that they will try anything that happens in the Whatcom County court system. And so because of that, we end up with a huge population in Whatcom County jails of Native Americans that have very small crimes that sit in jail for a long period of time because they are supposed to be tried under federal laws unless they're going into Whatcom County. So how do we balance that of having so many Native Americans locked up in a jail system for petty crimes when they should really just be released back into society just like anybody else? Because that seems to be a huge part of our population in Whatcom County is the natives in our jail system.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true, but I don't really know, so you may know more than I do. Both the Lummies and the Nooksack have their own court systems. So for the most part, tribal folks go through their own court systems, and at least the Lummies I know, because I've met with them and talked about it a number of times, have a much more progressive, restorative justice thinking than we typically had around here. So they try not to put people in jail for things that they think there's other better ways to treat people.
And from what
Now, I don't know how many natives end up in jail, and there's certainly some, but
From what
I
I
don't know what
understand,
percent.
they'll only try natives for federal crimes. So everything else goes into the Whatcom County system. Unless it is a federal crime, the natives can't try them. And so everything else, DWIs, possessions, domestic violence, burglaries, all those things end up in Whatcom County courts. And these people sit up to 364 days.
yeah, I don't know
For that
enough about it
reason.
to know. That doesn't sound right from what I've talked to at the tribal people and talked to the court people out at the Lummies. But do you know Dorley? I know you were on the sheriff's
Yeah,
little
well,
group.
I was just in Jack's office, and he was talking to us about getting the agreements with the cities now for the building of the new jail and all. And he mentioned the fact that 20% of the beds are Native American,
So it is a big percent.
20%. That's what they're figuring as they build this.
In the Lummies, at least, I know have a huge interest in that, because every time I go out and talk with them, that's the first thing that they want to talk about, is how we do better restorative justice than
Yes.
just locking people up.
Yes,
That's
and
20
they're really strong on that.
20% for drugs and alcohol, is that what I
No,
understand?
no, no, no.
Native.
No.
Native American.
Hardly their population.
Keats?
Another water issue, water quality, up until about 2010, in this watershed, under the old system, we had approximately 60% of the OSS inspected. And since then, very few. What can?
OSS?
On-site
On-site
septic system.
septic system. And there are a lot of those in this area. Can we be doing anything a little bit more effective in terms of getting inspections and repairs done? It seems like we have a low-interest loan program available. We have, well, what we're missing is that motivation, I guess, to get the things inspected and fixed.
Yeah, that was another one where the pendulum kind of
Yes.
went back and forth, because we originally passed a septic inspection regulations back in, I don't remember what it was, 2007 or 8, that required that you have an initial inspection by somebody that really knew what they were talking about, and then you have them re-inspected every so many years. And we got huge pushback
Right. I
on
was there.
that. And then it kind of went away to where, oh, if you go visit the health department's website and say you looked at the pictures on there, you can self-inspect. But then we don't even check to see if anybody's really doing that in most of the county. The two exceptions is we do check around Lake Whatcom still about whether people are being inspected, and in Drayton Harbor. Because they were, Lake Whatcom is a drinking water source, and Drayton Harbor was defined as a marine
Sensitive area.
sensitive area.
And that's.
It's not
slowly
really much
improving.
more sensitive than Birch Bay or a lot of the rest of the Nooksack too now, and so there's discussion about defining more of the county as those marine sensitive areas to be able to step up the septic system enforcement a little more. We've done a lot of monitoring of the waters both all over the county, and everywhere we've looked, we've done genetic monitoring, and everywhere we've looked, we found human bacteria. So certainly we find agriculture, cows and horses, we find human, we find pets, it's a little bit of everything, and then just wildlife too, birds and other wildlife. But everywhere you look, they're still human, which would, most of the places in the county is coming from septic. So I think there's a recognition we need to maybe not go all the way back to here, but split the difference somewhere that you have to have your system inspected at some point if you live maybe within 500 feet of a creek or 500 feet of a shore or something. So we're working on that.
Good.
And one of the things, I sent it to Al, but I can send it out and have Ruth distribute it, is we've got a number of issues going on, and the council has asked for feedback from citizens about things you think we really need to start doing better. So examples like, you need to ratchet up the septic system would be interesting. And I have an online survey going on right now that asks a bunch of questions about how would you prioritize these water issues and what do you think needs to happen.
Thanks for that.
And I could get that link to people if you want to plug into that. And septic is one of those things that people have been plugging in on. Natalie?
To follow up on it, I'm just curious, do you know how residents who are on septic are communicated with about their need to,
They're not.
okay,
We quit communicating with them all, for the most part. We still communicate a little bit in Drayton Harbor and Lake Whatcom, but the rest of the county, like I live in the watershed that was next on the list where the program was supposed to spread to, and we got one postcard in the mail saying, the law says you're supposed to inspect your septic system, I think, every 5 years, which is still the law. But then after that card went out, the more conservative council decided they didn't want to mess with that anymore and told the health department, don't waste any more money even communicating with people. So I think you'll see that change a little bit this fall. This is a budget year when the county gets a chance to, the council gets a chance to spend money, and I think you'll see some money reappropriated towards that program. Ruth?
Could you just give the site where your survey is and,
I don't think I can off the top of my head. It's one of those weird long,
oh, like your committee?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Great job, by the way. You're taking it, all the shots from different topics. And I'd like to circle back to the train, the conversation about the train throughout the county. And obviously, there's fire safety, and with the onset of ConocoPhillips potentially bringing trains in through our community, obviously the BP, and then of course the pie in the sky, coal. Has there been any provisions or any observations about how we're going to handle traffic, and have there been any overpasses, focused in upon to start to build in the event that anyone west of the railroad tracks could potentially be held up for extended period of times due to these 3 different projects bringing train cars to our community?
There's been a lot of talk about it. There hasn't been anything specific that I know of. That's one of the things that's supposed to be addressed in the environmental impact statement for the Cherry Point terminal, because there'll be way more coal trains at this point than there are oil trains. So blocking emergency responders was one of the issues that was clearly called out in the scope. So that'll be looked at, and I've heard both sides of it. Like I met with the Ferndale Fire Department and their EMS crew not too long ago, and they don't think it's gonna be a big deal, and they deal with a lot of the part of the county west of the railroad tracks, Sandy Point and those types of places. There's other fire departments that have huge concerns, so, you know, hopefully those studies will
I was
lend
thinking
some
more along the
clarity
lines
to that.
of the population of people who are now gonna be held up, and I was at the county office and
Right.
read up on the permit for VP, and there's a potential maybe 6 trains a day. So 6, and then ConocoPhillips maybe 6, and if the coal terminal goes through, there's another, potentially, we could be looking at upwards of 18 trains a day, hacking up our community, not only on the main line, but also the Custer Spur. And I guess my question is, although there'll be a large amount of money made, and I understand the railroads can do whatever they want,
Yep.
you know, would it behoove the county to sit down and say, potentially, we may have to now foot the cost of putting in a couple of main artery overpasses? Who's gonna pay for that? Will we, after the fact the permits are approved, will it land on our bill to pay for our convenience?
And that's one of the key issues in the EIS that I'm not supposed to talk about very
Okay.
much.
Fair enough.
But I know about it, and it's public information, so I
Somebody
can
asked.
talk about it. Because, like, there's a fairly in-depth study that showed that they can't bring this many trains through Bellingham without building a new siding in Bellingham.
Yeah.
And if they built that new siding, it would basically shut down Boulevard Park, which is a major tourist attraction for Bellingham these days. But that didn't get included as part of the project at Cherry Point.
Right.
When the proponent said that it was part of the project. So what the EIS is trying to tease out now is the only way you can bring that many trains in to build that siding, in which case that siding would be part of the project. And if it's part of the project, then they would have to pay the mitigation costs of dealing with that. If it's done as, overpasses are part of the mitigation of something else, then we would end up getting paid for it. So part of the EIS that's going through now is trying to determine who's gonna get stuck with the bill.
Selfishly, I was thinking of our small little population, this side of the,
Right.
railroad
Well,
tracks.
well, it's kind of the same though, that was just the example I know that's clear. And my understanding is that, you know, the public pays for that type of infrastructure, but if it's really part of that's needed for the project to go forward, then SSA could get tagged with parts of it.
Thank you.
I understand a few years back, there was a project on the books, or trying to get on the books for wind power, and it was not allowed. Is there any, are we looking at this again to allow something like that in the county?
Yeah, we spent, oh God, I don't remember how much time we spent on wind power. At least 2 years of meetings almost every 2 weeks, trying to come up with a wind ordinance that didn't fill the chambers with 200 angry people. You know, it was pretty humorous because we deal with all kinds of things that are way scarier than wind power that have gone right through. But what happened is Barbara Brenner and I actually wrote an ordinance and passed it, well, I think it was my first year on the council, 2006 maybe, to allow residential wind power, just the small little ones that you can use to power your house. And then some proponents came in and they wanted to put up bigger ones. And it dawned on the county at that time that they really hadn't thought about permitting these big wind towers that can be hundreds of feet tall. In the way that the law was written, you could put them just about anywhere. Well, some of them have fallen over, and sometimes part of them falls off. And you know, if you're going to have a 300-foot wind tower fall over, do you really want that in the middle of a residential area, or should there be setbacks so if it falls over, it won't hit anything? So we passed a moratorium until we figured that out, and then that darn moratorium drug on for 2 years. And then the council swung to a conservative group that didn't really support green energy much. And by the time we passed the final wind ordinance, the only place you can build a wind tower now is at Cherry Point next to BP. That's the only place left where you can put one. And BP's actually hired consultants, has looked at it a little bit. So people like you have asked, now that we have a new council, are we going to revisit that and try to open it up? Because we even had farmers asking us, will you please give us the ability to put a wind tower on our land to help make some extra money along with the farming? And the previous council couldn't find a way to do that. People that know a lot about wind tell me that it was a lot of battle without much benefit, because we just really don't have good wind resources in Whatcom County. And they're telling me right now that as cheap as natural gas has got, wind can't compete. So wait until things level out a little bit before you enter that battle again, because it really divided the community. Half of the environmental community was all in favor of it because they liked green power. The other half of the environmental community was there turning red in the face being against it because it was going to kill all the birds. And the two sides is like, oh, this is just too strange. The Audubon here and the Sierra Club here, and it's like, so it wasn't just the conservatives against the liberals, it divided very strange groups.
I see a lot of big power lines out in the county, those big massive
Yep.
ones. Has anybody ever tried putting a windmill on one of those? The birds are already going to avoid those anyway, because they're these big massive things. And the wind won't knock those over because they're very powerful. Couldn't you just put, without the big stand, a windmill on the edge of each of those?
It's an interesting idea, because we already have big corridors where those power
Right,
lines come
right.
through, and you might be able to go up above them or something.
It would be less expensive because you wouldn't have to build the tower
I
because it's
expect
already.
the power people will have something to say about
You won't interfere with it, but they will interfere with their profits perhaps.
it. Right.
But
Yeah,
it
but
wouldn't
no, I've
interfere
never
with-
heard of that, and it's an interesting idea, because we do have those corridors through the county.
I never thought of it until just now, but
Right.
it seems to make sense.
Yeah, a lot of
Well-
people were against it just because they didn't want to look at them. I mean, the best wind we
It's
had
already
was on
weird.
some of the hills around Lake Whatcom, and boy, the
Yeah.
Lake Whatcom people just came unglued thinking they were gonna have to look at
You've
a
already
wind.
got those ugly things there anyway.
Yeah, they have the power lines coming through Lake Whatcom.
And hearing them was the vibration.
Right, vibrations and flicker, we heard all, and if you go onto the internet, and impacts from windmills, you can learn all kinds of things, only part of it's true.
Yeah, Carl, getting back to the train issue, I wonder if you could clarify for us, not the sightings, but my understanding from a geological survey perspective, a geologist friend, has said that the Chuckanut rail line, the constant pounding of the trains may not hold up well to all this constant pounding of trains, regardless of what the trains are carrying. We aren't going to go into that.
Right.
And so my question is, should those rail lines need to be replaced or built stronger or something done to help sustain that rail line so that commerce can go forward? Who bears the brunt of that? I think I read that the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad said that they would only pay up to 5%. And so does the rest of that fall upon the taxpayers, or where does that money come from? I don't think the federal government is really in a position to bequeath large sums of money to
No, we
doing
can't
that.
even take care of our own roads, let alone somebody else's railroad. I don't know exactly, I've heard the same thing, that we can only recoup 5% if we want, railroad crossings and stuff fixed. I don't know about the rail lines themselves, because those are the property of the railroad, so I don't know if they recoup that money from whoever they're whoever they're transporting from or not. They've been doing a lot of work on the rail lines around here. I don't know, I was out at Cherry Point the other day, and they've replaced most of the ties on the spur that goes into, like in Talco there. They're replacing a lot of ties out in the South Fork. The people in the South Fork are really concerned that people in Bellingham are gonna yell enough that the trains are gonna get routed around up the South Fork and back down from Linden in this direction. Because there isn't a rail line there, they'd have to do a lot of work to upgrade it to be able to.
Well, their legal exposure is huge. They've got to do something to keep it maintained.
Right. And, it's not just us, it goes all the way down through the populated areas of Puget Sound, so.
So we don't know who would bear that brunt?
I don't know who would bear that cost.
Okay.
Someone here might. Dorley, do you?
Since you know a lot about pipelines, when I sit on Birch Bay Linden at the crossing there at Peace Portal, you can be 10 cars back and feel your car kind of moving and doing this. Isn't there a pipeline that goes right under coming from Linden, that goes right under that area? So my question is, do the pipelines, they'd have to, I mean, how safe are pipelines? And I know there's pipelines under the spur here too. How safe is that if the ground's moving and you can feel it vibrating and all?
Yeah, if you're standing on top of the right of way with a pipeline, you shouldn't be able to feel the pipeline doing anything underneath you. But one of the concerns is a couple of pipelines go under the rail tracks too. So with all that vibration from more and
And I
more rail
believe that's
cars.
at Birch Bay Linden.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, there is, because they,
Uh-huh.
like this, you said, they come in from Sumas and come
Yeah,
across,
yeah.
and they cross the rails right there.
So.
That's one of the concerns about stress on the pipelines where they cross the rail. And that is, I mean, they have to build the pipelines to certain specifications, and they take that into consideration, the way they bed them and how deep they go under the rail. But that is a concern. Haven't seen very many pipeline failures at railroad crossings. In, all the way back.
Carl, I was curious with all the talk about the water and the pollution in the water and alternative energy sources and all this, the pipelines and coal. Now that we do have cannabis laws in Washington state, one of the things that we've been working on is to bring industrial hemp. And industrial hemp would really be beneficial in a lot of these areas when it comes to water conservation, protecting the fresh water, using it as a phytoremediating barrier to protect the fresh waters, using it as an alternative energy source because it can be made into fuel. Is this something that we could possibly, you know, incorporate as our county is looking at different ways to bring energy and clean the water, as to say, you know, our community is supporting of this and we want to experiment because it is carbon negative, it's good for the environment, it's sustainable. You know, instead of spending billions of dollars on fossil fuels and making sure that China can have exporting of fuel where we're importing hemp, keep your hemp and we'll keep our fossil fuels and we'll just grow our own. You know, I mean, it seems kind of a win-win when I say it, when I speak it, when I read it. And it seems common sense that as an agricultural community and an environmentally friendly, conscious community, we would really be embracing that as we move forward with all of these talks, that we have this coming. We have the ability to have a different source rather than coal or pipelines.
Right, and hemp isn't one that I've studied much as far as alternative energy. Hemp's a pretty amazing material for a whole variety of uses. So I think the time's coming when, you know, we'll have industrial hemp here for a variety of reasons. I don't know how well it would offset, you know, coal and natural gas and other types of things. It certainly is a potential biofuel in a variety of ways. I think the state law has to get changed before we can really jump into that, but if we go down the recreational marijuana thing, the hemp seemed like an even easier one to do.
I thought you just said that we're the same as Colorado, which means that we would then allow hemp to be grown and used for this purpose.
You two probably know more about it than I do, but my understanding was the law that changed that approved recreational marijuana didn't include industrial hemp.
Oh, I thought so too, but then you just said we're the same as Colorado.
Recreational marijuana wise, I don't know about the hemp.
But do you all know the difference between hemp and marijuana? Hemp doesn't have any THC, you cannot get high off of it. It's used for industrial purposes. And Sandy mentioned many of the purposes. Another really good purpose is it soaks the toxins up out of the soil. So we're talking to people up at Huxley, the environmental studies people, about planting it all around the bay, which is full of toxins that have come from all the industrialized plants there.
And Marilyn's gonna be talking to you about it after we finish
Yeah,
asking
so
Carl everything he knows.
So I shouldn't go on right
I
now.
don't know about that, so
How the
Sorry.
Seahawks gonna do this year?
Thank you.
one more year at least. Keats.
You know, how does county government look at at this most recent report from the IPCC on global climate change? Does that register at all with government at the county level, or are you waiting for the feds and the state to take in it? I mean, this is a pretty provocative study on the part of pretty well,
Conservative people.
yeah, well, yeah, and scientists who pretty
Right.
much know what they're talking about. And it's gives us a fairly narrow window to work in. And here we're talking about coal and oil and all this other stuff still. I mean, How does this play out at the county government level? What kind of consideration does the county council and administration give to that kind of information, recommendation?
I'm trying to think, since the first of the year, I don't think I've heard global warming mentioned in county government. Not that it's not an issue and that we wouldn't address it. I think it is such a large issue. It's how does the county deal with it? I mean, the county already has won national awards for, a variety of conservation measures, energy conservation that we do, and alternative energy that we buy in place of, we are 100% alternative through Puget Sound Energy and stuff. So we do our little part. That's one of the things that's supposed to be addressed, and I was really pleased to see both the governor and the Department of Ecology pushing the EIS for the proposal out here at Cherry Point that they're going to address. How is that going to affect global warming? Does it make sense to, if we don't want to burn it here because we don't like that dirty coal, does it make sense to have them burn it in China and for it to come back across the ocean at us? So both in global warming and in mercury. So those will be addressed in the EIS, so it will be part of the decision we make on the permit, ultimately. But county government hasn't really weighed in on very many global warming issues. We have done science around water issues, though, and worked with Western to try to predict what it's going to do to water levels, because there's predictions that if you think water rights are tight now, wait for 20 years as global warming progresses. Or what the scientists seem to be telling us is the flooding may get worse. We'll probably have a similar amount of rain, but it might come in the form of rain instead of snow, so it will come down the river in a hurry, and we might not get the snowpack. So the in-stream flows may be worse, and the flooding may be worse too, even if it's the same amount of water ultimately falling. So we are doing some studies like that, trying to think about what the future for water use and flooding might be in the county. But we haven't embraced it very strongly.
Carl, on Lake Whatcom, I know that there's concern, of course, about the phosphates and trying to limit those and the nitrates that run off and the algae blooms and all that. I've seen a lot about that in the paper. But I had heard from somebody who's pretty much in the know about hydrocarbons in Lake Whatcom are, I was told, off the charts. I mean, he won't even wash his hands or drink the water from Lake Whatcom because of the hydrocarbon issue. And I've never seen anything written about that. And I was wondering if the county council is aware of that or knows anything about it, if that's of concern.
I think that's a red herring, and it's a big battle that comes up every once in a while because people think that we should ban boats on Lake Whatcom because they're concerned about hydrocarbons from boat engines ending up in the lake. Robin Matthews, the head of the Watershed Institute at Western, has been studying the lake for years, does all kinds of water testing. She doesn't think hydrocarbons are a problem in the lake. She doesn't think the water she drinks the water out of the lake. That's the first thing she'll tell you. She thinks we have very good water. It's going the wrong direction, and we have to keep it good by doing a whole bunch of things, but hydrocarbons isn't something that we should be spending a lot of money on now. There's certainly things we need to do around the lake to prevent more hydrocarbons, and some of that is we're already doing that around our roads, the way we collect the stormwater runoff on the roads, so the stuff coming out of cars don't end up in the lake. We have pretty strong spill prevention measures for, like, there's one gas station in Sudden Valley and the way that gas station gets its fuel and stuff. But I've never heard, and the recent report from Robin Matthews didn't indicate that there's hydrocarbon problems that people. There are some people that can't drink the lake water that are very sensitive to certain types of chemicals that are part of the disinfectant process that they already use in the lake. But that's really a very small part of people that have real strong immune problems have to worry about that. And it doesn't have to do with hydrocarbons. So that's what I know.
Okay.
Her latest study is online, and those are the things she looks for.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Two things. Do you know, or does anybody know what they're saying lately about the number of birds that are being killed by the wind mills?
Do I know?
Or the percentage of birds?
I don't know the percentages or not. It was a huge issue when wind power first started up because the turbines spun at a faster rate. so they were catching more birds. My understanding is that they've got much better with it. Audubon even has a protocol now for where you place them, and then part of it is to try to avoid area migration routes for birds. They spin slower now, which I guess helps too. I know they still kill birds though, so they haven't solved the problem altogether.
And this other question is.
Bats are another thing that, yeah.
I hear that Germany has a wonderful solar power program and has solar power in many houses, on top of their many houses, and help the people put the solar power there, and I haven't heard of anything like that in the United States yet. And that doesn't kill birds, right?
Right, yeah, it's amazing, because I travel quite a bit, and you go to places like Arizona and Texas, and it's just amazing that you don't see solar power all over. You almost see more solar power in Whatcom County than you see in places like that. And there are some programs that will help. I mean, Puget Sound Energy still has a program that helps pay for some of that, you know.
It was $26,000 for my neighbor.
Right, it's a big, costly thing. It takes a long time to recoup your money. There's a lot of tax benefits you can get, but that only is a benefit if you're making enough money to use those tax benefits, so. Natalie?
I'll answer part of that question, and that is, the utilities have lobbied to, they're concerned that there would be too much energy coming from these decentralized solar panels, and they're all tied to the grid. And so there is actual limits in state law, and probably in other states as well, on how much an individual property owner with a roof can generate. And
Because
that is,
TNT is why.
that is the difference, because they have to be able to sell, and first of all, they have to pay more for that energy. If and I do have solar on my roof, I sell all the excess back to the Puget Sound Energy. And they have to pay me more for that energy than they charge other people for. Well, no, I can't remember how it works. But, I mean, that's the green tags that if you sign up for that, that's where that money comes from. But when they're managing the power, their entire power system, they need to have control over, you know, to be able to meet demand as it happens. And so if they've got too much power coming in during the day through solar, they're concerned that they won't have the right mix of power, ways to generate power to meet demand 24 hours a day. And so they have lobbied to have laws to limit what you could do. And when we put our panels on, we could not put more, well, we lose if we generate more power than we need. We bank it with the power company, and then we use it during the winter or cloudy periods. At the end of the year, if we have any left over, we lose it. We lose that credit. So there's no incentive for us to, if we had like really low power needs and a really big roof, to put a whole lot more on. But that's what Germany does. That is the big difference. That Germany has incentivized everybody putting, doing it and actually making money on it. And so I think there's been some changes in the law recently to relax that a bit in Washington, but that's generally been the problem.
There's been some talk, I know I met with some of the Bellingham City Council members, and they were actually talking for a while of forming their own public utility district in the city of Bellingham, so they could more promote that type of solar. We ran the same thing with our wind power energy. One of the problems we ran into is that at the same time we were going through this big fight about putting up 1 or 2 wind towers, they were making all the big ones, like over near Ellensburg and stuff, shut down. Those are the first things they shut down at certain times of the year because of some of the state laws and agreements they have with hydro and other types of generating power. So there's all these laws that don't line up to make a lot of sense sometimes. Hard to believe, I know.
There was one other topic on the announcement, and that was development. Did you have something to tell us about the crossroads of development in the next 45 seconds?
Sure. Yeah, development, the county is still out of compliance with the growth management law on a variety of places, and there's kind of a nexus between development and water right now because the Growth Management Hearings Board found us that we weren't writing our development laws to take consideration of how it affects water quality and water quantity in the county. The other reason that I think we're at a crossroads, if you look at how big Seattle's growing and how big Vancouver's growing, and we're right in the middle, and a lot of people buying up property and doing development projects here right now don't even live around here, they're coming from other places. So we're kind of getting a big push for more development at the same time the state and various other people are trying to tell us to control development. And development is what the county council spends a huge amount of our time on. Sometimes very strange little esoteric things about how many, should the population of Birch Bay be 1,200 or 1,212, and we'll argue about that for weeks on end. And Natalie's on the planning commission now, and she gets to argue about it even in more depth than the council, I think. So lots of development issues about where development ought to happen, how many people we should allow in rural areas versus urban areas, and how that affects water and transportation and a whole bunch of things.
One of the things that would be helpful in our watershed and probably other parts of the county too with respect to development is if we look much more closely at the impact of development on stormwater. I guess from what I'm understanding, there is a requirement for developers to manage stormwater on site to the extent that that's possible, but the fact of the matter is has been and will be a lot of stormwater coming off developed properties with increased impervious surfaces and all that into county ditches, which have never been designed for that purpose, and then downstream affecting.
I know the ditch you're talking about.
Yeah, well, and many others too, but, and affecting downstream property owners with that water. Because the infrastructure is just not adequate for the amount of water that's coming off these properties. Now, the upper properties.
Right.
We've been deforesting, and we're getting more and more surface water, and we're having to deal with it as best we can with public funds, but it seems to me that developers, there should be some, not only a requirement, but some enforcement that developers, especially large-scale developers, should either manage that water on site or pay into the improvements downstream that are needed. I don't know how we do that, but.
Right, and that's, you put your finger on a whole bunch of problems there.
Yeah, sure.
And one of the things is the infrastructure to make sure that it's engineered and designed right to begin with. We do a pretty good job of that on big projects. Where we fall down is we have no follow-up or enforcement. So we have really good critical areas ordinances and really good shoreline ordinances and those types of things. Gets built into the permit, somebody gets, and then they go out there and build it. Nobody goes to look to see if they followed what they said they were going to do. And come to find out, often they don't. And that's something that's become clear to the county council in the last couple of months on a whole variety of fronts. Everything from illegal vacation homes springing up all around Lake Whatcom to issues drainage out by your house that just, there was no follow-up. So I think you'll see that addressed too, and it's on that survey that I mentioned.
Yeah, I already filled it out.
All right.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Carl. We're going to take a break, but don't run away because you've got thrilling things to hear about local activism on a couple counts and Rama hemp. So let's all gather back together in 10 minutes.